Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 2nd of August 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Justin.
Hello, Brian. Hello,
Walker.
everyone. Hello.
Justin has been doing a great deal of work recently with the British Constitution Group, and we'll shortly be hearing about that and what's planned for the future. We'll also be joined by live video Skype link by Alex Thompson with Eastern Approaches, and Alex will be reporting from the Netherlands. Well, the weather, I really don't want to talk about the weather because I drove into the studio this morning in grey, mist and drizzle. And I just thought, well, here we are, the 2nd of August, midsummer.
I came through some deep puddles today.
Puddles,
Yep.
OK. Well, that's it. At least we don't have a water shortage. But presumably the global warming is caused by those naughty ground squirrels and beavers that the Telegraph brought to our attention some months ago. Well, let's kick off the news with serious issues, and that is that basically Mr. Trump's potential First Lady has apparently been caught with no clothes, the Empress with no clothes. And we're not going to make a great deal out of this, but it's very interesting that people are beginning to research who this lady is. Is she material for a First Lady? Well, a few naked pictures, and that's not a problem these days.
I'm just trying to imagine a naked picture of Hillary Clinton. I don't want to go there. Please not.
You don't want to go there, but I will say somebody did make the comment over social media that we shouldn't be too hard on the on Melania Trump because she was the one who had to see Mr. Trump with no clothes. So we've brought a smile in at that. Let's get on to serious matters. Now, Justin, you've been doing a great deal of work to invigorate the British Constitution Group.
Yep.
And the theme which is coming to the fore is to restore the rule of law. That's the main initiative. With the key thing here that all are equal before the law. And as we're going to certainly see in today's news, we are certainly not all equal before the law. And I'm looking at that carefully. I think there's an L missing there. Apologies for that.
No, we'll let you off.
Well, OK, the message is the key thing. But of course, what we're seeing is a complete breakdown of law and order in this country. We've got courts which are simply being run by judges to their entire satisfaction. We're seeing juries pushed out of the picture. We're seeing the public actually barred from entry into courts. And of course, people who go to court seeking proper justice are being denied. Now, at the recent event in the Punch Bowl, Sunday just gone, there were a number of speakers. We've labelled this, it was invited campaign, it was invited campaigners, it was very well attended, it was good-humoured, it was well-informed, it was positive. And this was a lead up to the autumn convention on restoring the rule of law and essentially, you've said, tackling the endemic corruption in the United Kingdom. Now, Guy Taylor was speaking here, and as always, he was very humorous. But we also had former police constable John Hurst, who, of course, is so knowledgeable about the Constitution and common law. And he had some very good words to say. And also, we had other speakers who were quite happy to stand up from the floor and talk about what they knew were going on.
That was David Pidcock.
David Pidcock.
An old campaigner. He really has, he's been campaigning for 50-odd years on money reform and stuff. And he was really chuffed by what he saw. It was endorsement of what he's done in the past. He knows now the next stage is coming when we are literally going to take back control of our country by the rule of law.
Right. So, Justin, for viewers, and particularly for new viewers and listeners, what is going wrong in the country at the moment?
Well,
what do you see the problem is?
Well, when you talk to people like Guy Taylor and Tom, when you see people losing their homes with fraudulent and bogus paperwork, when you know that the country is experiencing appalling debt and austerity, and it's all a lie because the government can create, issue and control the amount of money needed for a happy, prosperous nation, where you look and you see party politics, where basically not very nice people, shall we say, get to the top to run the country, and decent people don't get a look in. and what we want to see a more independent MP. So where we're looking, but we are going to be confronting, for instance, we've got Magna Carta 1215. That is the base for all our constitutional rights, backed up by the Declaration of Rights 1689. But, our constitution is a trial by jury constitution, and we should have courts where juries of ordinary, decent, reasonable people decide what's reasonable and unreasonable. We do not want judges acting as judges, a judge and jury. This is what's happening in the county courts. It's what's happening in the family courts. We used to have grand juries, but of course we've got magistrates now. So people are not getting justice. Right. They are basically, there's a financial economic system that's embedded itself through the City of London in our country. And that system is literally, by deception, taking steps to remove us from our common law and to impose upon us Napoleon law, whatever you want to call it, the law of the sea, many different names. So basically where you are guilty until proved innocent, you have politically appointed judges, you do not have proper juries, and if you did have a jury, the judge controls the jury, habeas corpus you don't have, etc., etc., etc. All our most basic and fundamental rights don't exist. And what's happening is they are literally, the police don't understand common law properly, the academic world don't understand common law, or they don't want to. So we've really got to educate people. And what we've discovered is there's a mass of people out there who, for the best reasons possible, are ignorant of the law. They're ignorant of what's happening to them. But when it comes to academia and, economists and all the others, it is a poisonous cocktail of arrogance and ignorance together.
Okay, let's just pause there. Alex, what's your view? Has Justin hit the spot with that? Is that what is going on in the country? Is there something else going on?
Yes, Brian, that's exactly what is going on, and I see it in a kind of heightened way in that I follow through UK columns and social media what people are saying about the exercise of law from my seat abroad. And also I see it through the eyes of being in the Netherlands, where they had, like all the Germanic countries, common law, trial by a jury of your peers. And Napoleon scrapped it all when he invaded the Netherlands in 1795, and the Dutch, in the biggest blunder they ever made, kept that system intact, even in even more pure form than France and Germany have. To the extent that when someone dies, they're not allowed to bequeath their house. A notary public has to sell it. And if a child wants to inherit the house, he has to buy out the other children's share of the compulsory purchase. And with all this stuff going on, people just assume that law is law and that the rule of law is much for muchness all over the Western world. And the Dutch have gone to sleep to the extent that if you talk to them about jury trials, they will say, well, who wants amateurs deciding on your case? It's so thoroughly been pumped into them that professionals need to run the law. As for academics, it's very convenient for them, and especially academic economists and treaty signing types like diplomats. Very convenient if we have Napoleonic law, because the presumption in the treaties is always that each of the signatory states can force the authorities, including the police, who are held to be an arm of government, not of the people, can force the police to do certain things by state power. So, of course, common law is a great inconvenience, but it's we mustn't get tunnel vision about this. In all the English-speaking countries, common law is under threat through treason, but there are countries which have had horrendous tyrannical Napoleonic rule, several in Latin America and some of the Eastern European countries, which are bringing in jury trial and adversarial systems of evidentiary basis in courts. Mexico, Brazil, Russia even. So common law is not going to go away. And the wonderful thing about it, the best one-liner I've ever heard from John Hurst, is that you cannot abolish the common law. You can only dishonour it, and it will come back.
Right, Alex, thank you very much for that. I've got to say, from personal experience of going into family courts, just horrific to see secret courts, no members of the public, no members of the press, and a single judge deciding on the fate of families and of children. And one of the court cases that I attended was remarkable in that a mother was going to appear in front of a jury. And what took place in Portsmouth was that she was encouraged to sign a document which basically was her admitting guilt. The basic charge was that she'd taken her child out of the country, breaching a care order. But she was encouraged to sign a document outside the court The judge then told the jury to read the document that she had signed and, quote, to go outside and come back with an appropriate judgment. And there was absolute silence in the court, stunned silence, as people tried to get their heads around what this judge was doing. But of course, what the judge was doing was directing the jury to find the mother guilty. And because jurors do not know their rights, they duly left the court. They returned about 12 minutes later, and their verdict was guilty. And the significance of that event was that the jury was absolutely prevented from hearing all of the background to this vile case where the state had once again taken a child. The jury were prevented from hearing that evidence. And of course, that was evidence which would have set precedents in a legal sense to help many other mothers and fathers who've had their children. So that's just one example.
Could I also say that one of the most important things that juries are not aware of is the process of annulment by jury, because this is where the common law and the jury can prevent tyranny. Any statute, any rule of society passed by Parliament that a jury considers to be unjust, they can strike it off, they can strike it out. And that is a very powerful tool to prevent tyranny. And that's something the judges will not let the juries know, that they have that right to do that.
Indeed. So we're focusing in very much on the state of our politicians. We've talked about parties, but of course the other people who are very, very powerful within the political system are the whips. And we know from Tim Fortescue, 1973 whip in Heath's time, that the whips were gloating that people who were abusing children came to them, but the whips fixed it. And why did they do that? Because, quote from Mr. Fortescue on the BBC video, because the MPs would then do as they were asked from there on in.
Yeah.
So are you optimistic about what started to happen?
I am extremely optimistic. In fact, I'm buzzing, and so is everyone else who was there buzzing. I mean, we were looking today at the number of people on Facebook who are members of the people representing the different groups on Sunday amount to more than 150,000 people. But we've got students. I mean, we're going to annul. I mean, student debts will be annulled by the use of the Bradbury. So think of the students who are coming on board. The elderly, the infirm, the people who are worried about their future.
NHS.
NHS. I mean, somebody came up to me on Sunday and said, Justin, get on with it. You're like a hot knife through butter. We can't lose. And we can't lose. But what we need now for decent people now, not to just be on the keyboard, but to actually get up and get out there, leafleting. What we're doing now is raising the money. We're going to be raising, and I said to people, we must be ambitious. Let's raise £1 million. Because to the political parties, £1 million is nothing.
Absolutely.
We have got to, the truth needs resources to get out there. So this is what we're going to be doing, big time. And we're having this convention in November, which is going to be very well attended, I'm sure. We're going to choose a venue that's something special to the Constitution itself. And I think this will be where we raise the flag. This is where we set the whole thing in motion.
Okay, well, we've got lots more information to come up, and you're going to be joining me over the next few days, and we can talk about some of the reactions from our politicians. Let's move on to Brexit, and I was very interested to see this article pop up in the Daily Mail, and I'm just going to read a bit of the text that went with it. The quote on screen there is, "Nobody should be under any illusion about Jean-Claude Juncker's appointment of the inflexible, anti-British, arch-federalist Frenchman Michel Barnier as the EU's chief Brexit negotiator." In the article, it went on to say this, but then what better could we expect to Mr. Juncker, the swaggering, sneering, corrupt, boozed up former Prime Minister of Luxembourg? Forget the threats to jobs on both sides of the channel. All that matters to this little tyrant is the European project, which has kept him and his fellow members of the EU elite in fine wines, never mind that it's ruined countless livelihoods. So this is some pretty heavy criticism coming out to the fore, to which I say, isn't it remarkable that our press and media didn't seem to understand some of these problems over the last, whatever it is, 20, 25 years? Alex, do you think that this is more propaganda from the press, or is something starting to come undone in the European project?
Certainly, things are becoming undone and unstuck in the European project, and there is no denying that continental press and TV and social media from here all the way over to the Russian border are saying this isn't working, and several countries now have an apparent majority of people wanting a referendum at least on getting out. But having said that, Brian, you're quite right too that the propaganda is not to be taken seriously. I mean, this is the Daily Mail, which, like all these other papers, like the Daily Telegraph, is trading on the idea of being the spokesman for Middle England, for the middle class Eurosceptics, and yet has these great big articles on lifestyle stuff for people that are very much of a different demographic, increasingly so. And let's not forget that the Mail on Sunday, a paper with a very checkered history of doing hatchet jobs on sections of society, came out the Sunday before the referendum with a cartoon of the British Lion proudly straddling the world, standing with one leg in Britain and one on the continent, and calling it the best of both worlds, and telling the Mail on Sunday voters to vote Remain. So what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, we've got to be very cautious about what's happening. A little bit of feedback, I think, there. No, that's okay. Let's have a look at this, and credit to Mike Robinson, because he flagged up this gentleman, Anatoly Kaletsky, a couple of days ago, because this man was basically saying, well, never mind that people have voted Leave. What you need to do is talk to them and convince them that the policy was right in the first place. So he said the essence of democratic politics is responding to public dissatisfaction with policies and ideas, and then trying to change the judgment of voters. This is how numerous referendum outcomes in France, Ireland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Italy and Greece have been reversed. Never mind what the people say, let's use a little bit of manipulation on them, and we can change that. So have a look at this one, because we've got the Express here. The article is Downing Street rejects threat made by unelected House of Lords peers to block Brexit. But this is the key quote that I picked up. It says, one fellow Tory peer told The Times, the first step is to establish the public weren't given the correct information and show that they were led to believe things that weren't true. So here we have blatant political manipulation to say, well, the public, you didn't get it right, and we're now going to convince you as to how it should be.
I'm hearing back from some of my contacts that Article 50 is not going to be triggered for some considerable time, and that something or some things are going to happen which are going to shape public opinion into thinking, oh, well, perhaps we made a mistake with this referendum. I think we better call for another one and have a reconsideration and get ourselves back under the umbrella and the protection of the European Union.
Right, so 17 million people vote to come out, and those people are to be ignored.
Well, we saw it in Ireland, didn't we? If you don't vote the right way, you have to do it again. Just vote the right way, remember? That's how it's done.
I do remember.
Yep.
Well, let's focus a bit on Theresa May, because, of course, this lady has been put forward as the new Iron Lady. So she's Mrs. Thatcher Mark II with her smart dresses and everything else. This is the lady that we should trust. And apparently they reject what the Lords are doing. Well, this is all smokescreen. The reality is this woman has done nothing to protect the vulnerable in our society. So I've put up a couple of examples, but Melanie Shaw, very brave child abuse whistleblower, Home Office repeatedly informed they did nothing, and of course Melanie's still in prison. We've got the police whistleblower, we've got the Doherty family, we've got hundreds of others. This lady is vicious in her put down of the weak and vulnerable. She's created a vast state spying system. She's been growing an ever greater force of armed police, and of course they are now starting to appear on Britain's streets. She's stalling Brexit in this never-ending dialogue. There's not a lot for us to trust about this lady, and in fact many people would say that she's pretty dangerous. Alex, you now look at Britain from a slightly distant position. What's your opinion of Theresa May and the policies that she's brought in?
I do have to confess, it's hard to resist some kind of welcoming of some of her policies, in a sense, because she has got rid of some of the most egregious offenders of the last cabinet. Osborne completely out of the government, that awful Anna Soubry out of the government, the Baroness who said we must obey our MPs out on Huria. But on the other hand, this could be cold and calculating. You've always got to be sober in your judgments of politicians, haven't you? I mean, the Continentals are very quick to see a certain kind of image, especially a lady with Mrs. Thatcher. I mean, the term Iron Lady was coined by the Soviets, not by us. And they think, oh, this lady is going to give us a right handbagging. And so I think that kind of image is deliberately being inflated now for Theresa May. And people are perhaps reveling, her supporters, in the idea that she's really tough and no nonsense. And more down to earth than Cameron. So there's obviously these planted stories about how she's getting rid of government profligacy and being a more humble kind of leader. But no, you have to look at the people behind her. Who has she retained in post who shouldn't have been retained? What does she actually know from her record of past speeches about our way of life, our customs, our laws? Has she acknowledged some injustices and abuses that have been flagged up to her? And on that score, I have to say I'm not optimistic at all.
No. Well, let's bring in a bit of the BBC's manipulation. Now, this article relates to Scotland. This is a family, the Brain family, who are Australian and are about to be deported from Scotland. But they've had huge support from Nicola Sturgeon. And now we've got the BBC with a massive article that actor Tom Conti is going to pay £3,000 to prevent them being deported. It's all terribly unfair, apparently. And if I can just bring in the other one here, the BBC have shown absolutely no interest, in contrast to the threats of and harassment to the Doherty family, who lose their children from simply reporting abuse. And I've got to say, it seems that it's obvious what is going on here, that the BBC is muddying the waters in order to protect the abusers of children. They've had an internal investigation, they've cleared themselves, and now they're working extremely hard to clear other people who've been accused of the abuse of children. This remarkable couple, I'm going to bring them up on screen, Janice and Brian Doherty, literally in fear for their lives. They're living in Ireland at the moment. They've had to leave Scotland because of the threats and intimidation. Their children taken at gunpoint. Why? Simply because they reported a man who they believed was a paedophile. They haven't abused their children, harmed them, neglected them. They are now living in fear, and nobody will talk about this case in Scotland, but the First Minister will support the Brain case. And let's have a look at a letter that's been written to this is the Irish Justice Minister, Frances Fitzgerald. And a lady has written to her, which I'll try and read out the key parts of this letter. Now, Mr. Colgan is her secretary, so it's an open letter. The Justice Minister's apparent endorsement of the lawless persecution of the Doherty family. It says, thank you for your email on behalf of Ms. Fitzgerald. And this is the meat of the text. Early in 2015, a judge in an Irish court dismissed allegations against Janice and Brian Doherty and ordered all persecution of this law-abiding couple to cease forthwith. In addition, the same judge ruled that the notes from Police Scotland, on which allegations against the Dohertys were based, were without merit and should not be used to renew actions against the family either immediately or at some future date. This judgment, which has not been superseded by any other, continues to be utterly disregarded. In direct defiance of the judge's decision, the Doherty children were once more taken from their loving home and put into care on the 17th of December 2015, while their parents continued to be hounded on the basis of notes which have been declared in an Irish court of law to be fraudulent and worthless. Bearing in mind Miss Fitzgerald's remit, which is to uphold the rule of law in the Republic, why is she permitting the decision of an Irish court to be held in open derision? Why are those who are so clearly defying an Irish judge's ruling not being charged with contempt of court? And if I bring it on, 2, the Dohertys have petitioned for habeas corpus in respect to their children under Article 40 of the Irish Constitution, and their petition has been granted by the High Court. Yet this petition is being ignored. Bearing in mind Miss Fitzgerald's remit, which is to uphold the rule of law in the Republic, why is she not ensuring that this fundamental provision of Irish law and the independent decision of the High Court in the Doherty's favour are respected? Please note, Miss Fitzgerald is not being asked to arrest members of the Garda or to intervene in an individual case. She is simply being requested to uphold judgments which have already been lawfully made by those appointed to do so. As things stand, a reasonable person can only conclude that the Justice Minister is uninterested in fulfilling her primary duty, which is to ensure that the rule of law is impartially maintained. Now, with just a quick comment, Justin, this is exactly what you're getting at.
This is what I'm saying. Where is a jury in all of this? Where are, if the ordinary, decent, reasonable people held a Doherty's case, then the real perpetrators and the wrongdoers would be called to account immediately. So where is the jury in all of this?
No jury, because it's a family court hearing. So we simply have a closed court, a star chamber,
It's
in fact.
Wrong.
Which is just run by a jury. And now we can see where that leads us. And as UK Column has been warning and warning over many years, we are now at the state, literally in the state, where government can say, we are going to take your children. You can complain if you like, but then all doors are simply shut in your face. Now, the BBC, of course, does not want to talk about the Doherty case, but what are they getting very upset about? Well, Lord Janner. So we've now got a major article, and it's going to be followed by interviews with his daughter, who says that basically the whole thing against her father is an outrage. It's attacking a corpse, I think she says. The BBC is literally starting the spin to protect the establishment. They will not report on Holly Gregg. They won't report on the Dohertys. They won't report on Melanie Shaw, Mickey Summers.
And ITN are just as bad because they too refuse to go anywhere where the truth is.
They certainly do refuse to go where the truth is. So we've listed some of those cases there. And we have a BBC which is then exposed as having paedophiles in their organisation, but they run an investigation to their entire satisfaction and then say, well, there isn't a problem. And the public is supposed to believe this, the same public that's paying the 3.65 billion to run this operation. Alex, the BBC seems to have some weaknesses.
You could say that, Brian, but it's the first and best in the category of national propagandist. And it's one of the many ways in which we British do things to the envy of tyrants all over the world. I mean, one thinks back to the period when Churchill was banned from the BBC's airwaves because some BBC bod had decided in the mid-30s that he was just a bit too extreme. We don't want his voice, so he had to go to Normandy and address the nation on longwave from a private French station. And much has continued in that mould. The German two state propagandists, ARD and ZDF, are, as of a couple of years ago, funded by a universal tax because the Germans realised the BBC's problems with licence fees. Okay, less in Germany where the police can batter your door down and you don't need to go through the common law channels. But still, the Germans decided that universal tax was the way to go. And so people are obligatorily funding this stuff now. And the editor of the ZDF has admitted, and again, I think in this he's just acknowledging openly what the British do privately. He said, well, we take our orders from Merkel. We report on things that Merkel wants us to report on. So no, the BBC has plummeted, really. BBC World, which used to be the flagship output, has been fully spun off and privatised, and people are openly contemptuous of it. Even the Americans, who are slightly less well served with their media market, have realised it's a con job. So no, I mean, the BBC stock has really fallen. Probably that's why they're having to recoup their money through outlets like BBC Monitoring and BBC. Well, Media Action apparently doesn't raise any money, but it certainly does some things abroad which are questionable.
One of the actions that the rule of law movement, or whatever we want to call ourselves, is going to be doing is challenging the BBC to a level playing field of live debates where we have issues of historical proof to put before the people, and let's see how they wriggle.
I think there'll be a silence and a closing of doors, but the idea is absolutely right.
Yeah.
Let's just remind ourselves, of course, of the dirty dealings in the background. I've just chosen one of many articles. This is CBS News, but back in 2015, They were saying this in 1986. Anthony Duff, director of Britain's premier domestic spy agency, that's MI5, told Margaret Thatcher's cabinet the risk of embarrassment from publicising a politician's suspected child abuse was greater than the danger he represented. So there we are. That is how the British state controls its politicians. That's how the British state then covers up the abuse of children to ensure that nothing should disrupt that very clean-cut, polite, suited political agenda. Well, what better description than for David Cameron? So let's bring him in because, of course, we're now beginning to forget about Mr. Cameron. But a few articles have popped up recently saying, well, let's just remember what this man has done and who he's been given honours to. To me, this seems to be the style of this man. Of course, he denied that there was any child abuse going on in Westminster, and I am deliberately pushing this subject because this is the engine of corrupt politics. He didn't really care if there was anything going on, but he did want to bomb Syria, but he wasn't particularly worried as to what would happen to the children displaced by the war. And we're now at the stage where European agencies are saying a mere 10,000 migrant children are missing. We've got a mere 300 in the UK, and a wall of silence from David Cameron, which says, who cares? But his hairdresser, Raffaella Claudio Carbosiero, if I've pronounced that properly, is clearly worth more than the British public, because good old Lino, as he's known, who cuts hair for Madonna, Jason Donovan and the X Factor crew, he's important, so David made sure that he's got a gong. This is obscene, isn't it, Justin?
It's totally obscene. And I would like to make place on record now, I do not want a single honour. When we succeed, I don't want the state giving me any gongs or anything.
You don't want a corrupt state giving you honours?
No, please, okay. No. I'm have it on public record that I don't want any gongs when I get buried.
I'll arrange it. OK, well, let's have a look at the state of Britain. And, of course, armed police is a subject which comes up more and more. So we've got the Express here with a major article saying that the police have been beefing up their counter-terror squad to be permanent standby amid terror fears. Counter-terror police officers armed with guns are now on standby 24 hours a day amid fears of a terror attack on London. Counter-terror police officers armed with guns. Sorry, I've got to repeat there. I beg your pardon. So basically, we're saying that these police are there full-time. Armed police have now been brought onto the street. No parliamentary debate whether we wanted a complete change in our policing system. And
problem, reaction, solution. They've done it, and this is where the rule of law, the people, the 99.9% of the people have got to wake up, ask the right questions, confront our decision makers, and we have got to stop this. Otherwise, we will be living in George Orwell's 1984. Bottom line, the cell door is about to shut. It's time for action.
It's time for action. And let's see how this progresses. And we're going to pass this over to Alex in just a few moments. But an article here from the New York Times. This was from a little while ago, but it was a very good article. And it was saying what is really going on in France now, because they're on the limits of liberty, equality and citizenship. And those are the headings of the article as the New York Times starts to pull apart the descent of France into a controlled police state. And I'm going to follow this in a couple of seconds by what's been happening on the cross-channel ferries. But Alex, this situation in France has been renewed, hasn't it? So effectively, we've got France no longer a democratic nation, but what? A dictatorship or a police state? How would you define it?
I think police state is a fair description. The 3-month state of emergency provision has been rolled over, if I'm not wrong, 3 times now, with a convenient excuse, either an attack or a major sporting event, each time just before the 3 months elapses. So we've spent pretty much the whole of 2016 in a state of emergency, and it bears repeating that state of emergency involves police chasing you through the streets, shouldering your door down in the middle of the night, and also breaking up meetings of more than 3 people on the street. Not even a whole family can walk together without risk of being approached by a police officer. So no, civil liberties are on very thin ice in France. But then, since their revolution and their liberté, égalité, fraternité idea, the whole point has been that the people award themselves liberties, and their representatives can take those liberties away again. So it's hardly surprising. I mean, France, just before the revolution in the mid-18th century, was the land that produced the greatest political philosopher of all time, Montesquieu, who wrote in L'Esprit des Lois, The Spirit of the Laws, a book which investigates the spirit behind each country's constitution, says that constitutions have a limited shelf life if they're man-made. Common law isn't. It's universal and timeless principles. But if a country decides to bring in a tyrannical or liberty-like constitution, it's going to expire in the fullness of time.
Right. So if we follow things through, we've got major changes to the constitution of this country which are creeping in. They're not being openly debated. They're creeping in. We've got a neighbour that we've gone into a 50-year military pact with, France, that is, you've described as a police state. And now we can see some joining of the issue. Let's have a look at this. This is the cross-channel ferries. And what's been happening is that basically they've been used to have exercises where armed French sea marshals have been dropped on the boats by helicopter in order to show that they can bring armed police in a hurry on board to the ferries. And this is a quote from the article itself. The exercise brings the reality of armed sea marshals, they mean permanent sea marshals, a step closer. So you're not even going to be able to get on board a ferry now and relax without seeing, it would appear, armed police walking around. And one of the things I can say is there's nothing more dangerous than small arms inside a ship because of the risk of ricochets. Police with weapons at sea in confined spaces, I think I'd be particularly worried. Well, if we stay with the maritime theme, let's bring in this, because it appears that it's only Russia today that's really talking about the fact that China's been holding massive military exercise in the East China Sea. Apparently it's involved hundreds of ships and submarines from all 3 fleets of the People's Liberation Army. And according to the Russia Today report, it's being held to prepare for sudden, cruel and short modern war. So they've had a mere 300 ships. Remember what we've been talking about, the Royal Navy at the moment. 66 ships, and 33% of our capital ships are not fit for action. The Chinese here mobilising 300 ships, fighter planes and troops, together with exercise of coastal defences. Alex, the Chinese are starting to flex their muscles, and of course we've had the sparring in the China Sea with the Americans, but it seems that the Chinese are now really coming to the fore to say we are a nation that you have to take notice of.
Oh yes, Brian, and the Chinese have patience and determination. I mean, I know it's the old stereotype of the inscrutable Oriental, but it's so true. They think in terms of centuries and millennia. They think of the whole rise of the West since about 1500 as a kind of blip, an aberration in history, and they've patiently tolerated it, including Matheson and his HSBC cronies looting them and bleeding them dry in the Opium Wars in the 19th century and forcing these treaties on them. They've grinned and borne it. And now they're suddenly coming active, and you see it with the diplomacy, with even Her Majesty deliberately being overheard saying, weren't the Chinese awfully rude to us on the last state visit? And you see it with this muscle flexing. I mean, the Chinese don't do that until they're quite confident that they have pretty much superiority. And so if they've got superiority over the US Navy in the Western Pacific and the Spratlys, then that's it really. There's equilibrium, and we no longer have a single superpower. We have what the Russians call a multipolar world. Incidentally, that 575 ship that was in the illustration, I don't know whether you would call that a large frigate or a small destroyer, but it looked a pretty nifty piece of equipment with a nice narrow hull and long bow. We don't have anything like that, do we?
Can it operate in warm waters, unlike ours?
I would suspect it can, and the feedback that I have had on Chinese ships, and of course there was a visit a little while ago of Chinese ships into Portsmouth, was that everybody was very, very impressed at what they were looking at. So yes, you're making a point that at the moment we've got Britain as supposedly a world power reduced to the state where it can't build a working warship, which is quite incredible. But let's follow through the China theme, because Russia Today also had this story, which I found fascinating, which is apparently that a Chinese gentleman, Kun Shan-chun, a naturalized US citizen, has been charged with acting as a Chinese agent. And one report made big of the fact that he was an FBI employee and he'd had access to top secret material, but he'd been spying and leaking sensitive information to China. But if you looked a bit further, it then seems to be that the panic is because he's been passing over so-called secrets from Monsanto and DuPont in regard to genetically modified seeds.
Oh,
now,
dear.
why
Yep.
the Chinese would want to steal this sort of technology, I would have thought they would have been disassembling the seeds in order to see how to prevent the spread of GM crops.
This is the big picture coming here.
Big picture coming up. Alex, I'm just going to come back to you again on this one. Have you any idea how the Chinese view GM products?
There's a terrible cynicism in China with regard to the duty to provide good, nutritious food to each other. And it comes from this Confucian idea that all your loyalty belongs to the in-group, which at its narrowest is the family and the clan, and at its widest is the nation. And beyond that, who cares? I mean, remember all the milk powder scandals of the last few years where, milk powder was being pumped full of useless nitrogen and so on, and even worse stuff, simply to make a quick buck. I'm afraid, much as I esteem the Chinese for their great intelligence and long history, there is a really cruel streak to them. Who gives a toss, basically, is the attitude. So I can well imagine that some money-making gentlemen and consortiums in China, who may well be in with the party at regional or national level, would be quite willing to do a quick bootleg of GM technology in order to sell the lesser nations that surround them in the Chinese view, the vassal states of Asia, to sell all that lot's food that will,
and Africa.
China a big buck. There's not what they lack, being atheist stroke Confucian with a few Christians latterly and the Muslim West and the Buddhist North. What they lack is the hardcore Satanist agenda that all the Western countries are afflicted with people at the top of the pyramid cackling and wishing us all to die painfully. The Chinese don't have that, thank God, and like the Russians, they're rather horrified that we're run by an elite that is like that, a super elite, I should say, not a huge number of them. But that doesn't mean that the Chinese are cuddly.
Okay, well, if the Chinese are not cuddly and they've still got a party which is a communist party, we'd just briefly remind ourselves that it's remarkable that the Chinese should be invited in by the Conservative government to build our power stations. So we've now seen the Chinese operating in the eastern China Sea. We see the concerns in America that this nasty communist country is stealing secrets. And yet the British government has seen fit to say, well, let's bring in the Chinese to help fund Britain's strategic infrastructure. And of course, nuclear infrastructure has got to be some of the most sensitive there is. So we've now got Theresa May, we're supposed to believe, is delaying the Hinkley Point plant due to concerns over the Chinese stake. And I'm just going to bring this up. We showed it a few days ago. We had this statement here from EDF. So we are faced with the challenge of developing a new supply chain and rebuilding the UK's nuclear construction capability. EDF is the French government, and the French government was working with the communist Chinese government. So apparently all of these politicians were completely unaware of the fact that China is still seen as a hostile nation. Alex, do they think that the public is entirely stupid? Or what is it with these people? Is it sheer arrogance? Do they think they can't be seen? How can they get away with this?
Well, I went to school with the children of some of those politicians on screen, or very much others of their ilk, and the children were nice enough. But if Daddy came to collect them, you could hear the kind of things they were muttering, and especially the Tory grandees, I have to say, with the champagne socialists of Labour in close second. They really don't care a fig for the common man. If you look at Gordon Bowden's material, you will see how, particularly in this area of oil, gas mining, nuclear fuel, where Britain and France have very closely overlapping corrupt elites. Think of Anne Lauvergeon, for example, who was at Areva, the French nuclear fuels people, until a few years ago. There is very much an attitude of, launder your money through these outfits, retire from politics to get a plum appointment with these people and operate internationally. Africa is the backyard, but the waste dumping is often done in Europe itself. And yes, particularly the provincials. I mean, in Gordon Bowden's material, Anglesey and other far-off places in Britain are regarded as suitable to dump the waste. So we really are being treated like provincials and twits, I have to say. The French press, probably because the French people are much more used to elite rule, the French press is a little more on the ball. And in this matter, it was reporting last year that cheap Chinese steel, never proven for as safe in nuclear fuel technology, was going to be used in Hinkley Point and in others of its category, including back in France.
Could I just make a very, very quick point and say that the Bradbury Pound would pay for any infrastructure projects like this, and we don't need to go to any other nation.
Indeed.
Full stop.
But that's a little bit too complicated for some of our politicians, as we will discuss in the coming days. I could not resist this, but as I trawled the internet looking at news this morning, up popped an advert for the Royal Navy. This was a screenshot that I got very quickly. I've said here that it was RN recruiting video that was just too accurate, because it said, would you like to join the Royal Navy because you can learn how to fix Type 45 destroyers. So this is the state of our armed services, and I put out a challenge that I'm still waiting for the more senior Royal Navy officers to wake up. Some of them are beginning to stir from their slumber, but apparently they're still unaware of this. I don't know whether it's old age creeping up or too much golf.
I really don't understand your problem here. You know that the mindset in government likes wind power. We've still got HMS Victory. I'm sure we can chop a few oak trees down and make a few more warships.
Environmentally friendly.
And I'm sure they could take to hot water like a duck to water, you know.
I think we might have a solution. David Ellis, of course, yesterday when he was with us, was talking about other ships of some vintage which seem to work. Well, let's switch subject. Alex, you pushed out a particularly interesting tweet about the situation in Turkey. We'll just pop it up on screen. And so here we are. The Economy Minister, Bekci, if I pronounced that correctly, is talking about a US-backed putsch.
Yes.
And he's also saying we're going to do something pretty unpleasant.
Well, this was 2 days ago. He was saying in the abstract that the putschists who were backed by the US would, quote, perish in 1.5 to 2 square meter pits in the ground like sewer rats. That's a direct quote. It was reported in a bit of foreign language press, but not much. But that would, in isolation, give the idea that we're going to make them die in foxholes. But a few hours later, it became apparent that at least one of the putschists who had died in the attempt had been bulldozed, or had his corpse bulldozed into a freshly dug cemetery. And although, yes, Turkey's a secularist state, you're not supposed to allow even prisoners of war's bodies or rebels' bodies to be dumped in a grave without asking their family whether they want prayers said. But that's what happened to this guy. So I think the 1.5 square meter, that's about 6 foot deep hole, isn't it? I think what he was referring to was graves, basically. I think he was suggesting that they would already be dead by the time they went into the pits.
Right.
So this just illustrates really that there is no side to root for in the Turkish coup. It's 2 lots of nasty, extreme Turkish nationalist Islamists, 1 lot who's seen through the US and 1 who hasn't.
Right, 1 lot who's seen through the US and 1 lot that hasn't. So that's pretty interesting when we look at this article. I've got my eye on the clock, so I think we'll have to finish after this. But this is a report here from the Telegraph that apparently Barack Obama has ordered the US bombing of Islamic State in Libya. Now, from the article, it indicates that this has been a request from the United Nations. Well, they would certainly want more war. But we've got Libya wrecked already by the US and UK. Terrorists were being funded by David Cameron and Foreign Secretary William Hague. There was some £240 million was transferred across to help the, I think they were the friendly terrorists, but money provided by the political system. Then we got Gaddafi murdered, which is to help bring on the West's ISIS terror campaign. We've had the political charity Common Purpose paid by the EU to reframe the public sector in Libya. And what have we got? Chaos to deliver more terrorist threats. So I'm going to say, just end us there, Alex, if you will. What is going on? They just Libya has been smashed to pieces, but they just seem to want to stamp on the country. Now it's down.
I think Libya was more than this cabal could chew when they bit it off, because they were used to dealing with core Near Eastern countries which have a strong sense of statehood and cohesion. And before that, Yugoslavia or Serbia was the first targeted in this wave. And all these countries could, have their infrastructure bombed to the Stone Age and then get up again. And, they were forced to reorder their parts from the West, and that's why the bombing was done. But they did it, and they pulled together in the same way as the Germans and all the occupied countries did in the rubble after 1945, or during 1945. But what has happened this time is Libya is half Arab and half African. And the country's fallen apart at the seams. It's tribal. This nasty ISIS lot in Libya that you were talking about were entertaining themselves by making the black captives dance like monkeys. This is how backward these people are. And Libya doesn't have that national cohesion. So it's requiring extra effort, because it would be all too embarrassing and all too obvious if the country remained in pieces for years.
Can I just quickly say that Gaddafi practiced national credit, and that was one of the main reasons why he had to be brought down. He wouldn't play with the central bankers.
And he wasn't playing with the oil market either. So we're going to end on this picture, which I find particularly unpleasant and troubling, but we need to just remind ourselves, because, of course, it was the kiss of death from Tony Blair that was the major step on the road to the end of Gaddafi. I've labelled it here Gaddafi's big mistake. He confided in Tony Blair, the man prepared to deceive Parliament, the British nation, over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So what's going on? We're back on the state of Britain's politicians. Justin, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us, because, of course, you're putting forward the solution with the British
We're certainly not offering hope, and we're certainly not offering change. We're offering solutions.
Solutions. And Alex, a 30-second close.
Yes, just that awful image of Blair. I knew about the Gaddafi rapprochement a bit before others, because we had internal briefings about how we'd done it. And Blair wasn't mentioned. It was always Britain rapprochement with Gaddafi. But the smugness of those senior officers from various services, how far up themselves they were and how they congratulated themselves at Gaddafi. And I had no idea at the time, although I've read up about it since, Gaddafi was a Pan-Africanist and a Pan-Arabist, and I've got no love for him as such. But he had a very solid proposition to get Western moneylenders out of the whole of Africa and the Middle East. So that explains that.
Excellent. And I'm just going to end with a plea, and that is that somebody pointed us at this really excellent diagram of how the world's media works. These are the key companies listed: AOL, Time Warner, Walt Disney, Vivendi Universal, News Corporation, Viacom, and Bertelsmann. And of course, Bertelsmann immensely powerful inside Germany and the work of the European Union. I don't know where this diagram's come from, so I can't attribute it and say thank you to whoever's produced it. If any of our viewers can help us track this one down, I'd obviously like to acknowledge where it's come from. And I'd also like as much checking as possible to the validity of the information. But of course, what it is suggesting, and I'm sure it's correct, is that the world media is in the hands of sort of 6 major corporations.
Yeah. The global financial elite control it, and that's the bottom line to it, as they control so much else. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that ends today's news. Thank you very much for joining us. If you like what we do, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation to the UK column. And Justin Walker will be joining me over the next few days to talk about what really needs to be done in UK to start cleaning up Britain for everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.